Dr. William Lee says you are what you eat. Here you will learn how certain foods can help our body's natural defense systems. For this Connect 4 Ideas Forum, the internationally renowned physician, scientist, and author discusses his new book, Eat to Beat Disease, the new science of how your body can heal itself. He also speaks on how your diet can play a critical role in treating diseases, including cancer, diabetes, blindness, heart disease, and obesity. He serves as our COVID-19 expert and the role that angiogenesis, the development of new blood vessels, has in healing COVID. He has even discovered how we can use diet and certain foods to stimulate blood cell regeneration and repair our body's blood vessels. Dr. Lee, Dr. William Lee, thank you so much for joining me. I am a huge fan of your new book. It's a breakthrough, okay? Eat to Beat Disease, the new science of how your body can heal itself. It's a breakthrough because it's where holistic medicine meets science. So you are a pioneer, okay? And I learned so much in reading this book. I want to ask you about the 5 natural defense systems of our body to start off with. With so much emphasis lately on building immune strength and gut health, or microbiome in the gut, directly affecting all bodily systems and organs and how they are at the root of fighting disease, can you give us a synopsis of the other 3 defense systems and why they are all equally important in understanding a new way of defining health?
Right. Well, first of all, Christina, thank you for having me and your kind words about my book. I'm somebody who's a medical doctor and a research scientist, and although I've taken care of many people who are ill, my question has always been, how come we don't get sick more often? Like what makes us healthy at all? And that's part of what led me on this journey to understand how foods can help our body's natural defense systems. And what are those defense systems? Well, these are hardwired systems that we're born with. So from the time we come out of our mom to our very last breath, our defenses are working as hard as they can to intercept illness, to protect our body, and to fix things when they're actually broken. And it's almost to the medical community that those are the invisible parts, right? So are you healthy? Yes, I'm healthy. What does that mean? Well, it means that I'm not sick. Well, I will tell you that our new scientific understanding is that we work hard. Our body works hard to our health. So what are some of the health defenses? Our circulation, our blood vessels, angiogenesis, 60,000 miles worth of blood vessels that connect every organ in our body. It delivers oxygen, it delivers nutrition. It's exactly what we need to be able to remain alive and actually functional. When those blood vessels go down, or when we've got too many blood vessels to feed disease, we get into big trouble. That's a defense system we have to support. Our stem cells, most people don't realize that we actually regenerate. When we were kids, we were told by our teachers, starfish regenerate, salamanders regenerate, people don't regenerate. Wrong. Science tells us now that humans do regenerate, and they regenerate from a small number of stem cells that are living inside our bone marrow, in the middle of our bones. And our diet, our lifestyle, our foods can actually coax them out to help us repair from the inside out. That's a defense system that actually slows down even our aging and our ability to actually stay vibrant and youthful. Our microbiome, our gut bacteria is really important. Tip of the iceberg, we know that our gut microbiome not only makes us gut healthy, but actually even controls hormones out of our brains. An interesting fact that I discovered in doing my research with people at MIT is that there's bacteria that actually help our wounds heal faster. The same bacteria actually helps our brain release oxytocin. Oxytocin is the social hormone that that our brains release when we see somebody we love, we give a hug or a kiss or have an orgasm. That's actually oxytocin coming out. So imagine a bacteria in our gut, healthy gut bacteria, that does something that good for our bodies and our brains. Our DNA is another repair system. Everybody thinks the DNA is our genetic code, and it is. What people don't understand is that our DNA can fix itself when it's being damaged by too much sunshine, solvents that we breathe in, secondhand smoke, preservatives and chemicals that we eat that cause damage in our body. Our DNA is hardwired to fix itself. And because as we age, our DNA has a fuse, a life fuse, I call it, called telomeres, that burn itself down. It's like a candle burning itself down. When it burns down really fast, we age more quickly. That's why skin looks so wrinkled. That's why hair looks so crappy when people age really, really fast. But guess what? Our diet and lifestyle can actually slow the burn, and remarkably can reverse the burn. Think about lighting the fuse of Mission Impossible, but instead of actually having it burn down to the dynamite stick, it goes backwards and the fuse gets longer. That's reversing cellular aging. And of course, our immunity is our fifth health defense system that's more powerful than we thought. Like every grandma said, you got to have a good immune system or you're going to get sick. We now know that our immune system is so powerful, even in our 80s and 90s, that if it is allowed to do what it is supposed to do, if it is all it can be, it can even get rid of cancer. Even when a cancer is spread throughout the body, our immune system will clean up and remove all cancer. And so these health defenses, angiogenesis, stem cells, regeneration, microbiome, DNA protection and repair, and our immunity, these are the 5 pillars of our health. That the great news is that what we eat can activate them and help our bodies get stronger.
But that's how they're all connected. So you talk about anti-angiogenic foods and their ability to decrease the growth of blood vessels around a tumor per se, around some form of disease. I want to know how that works. And also you call them the blood vessels of life and death, which is really interesting. And that we have 19 billion capillaries in our bodies, literally, which have the capacity to control whether disease survives or not. So how do those antigenetic foods work?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let's talk about just blood vessels in general. They feed everything. Our blood vessels there's so many blood vessels in our body that if you were to pull out all the vessels and line them up end to end, like a big thread, like a yarn, you'd actually form a line that would wrap around the earth twice. And so you're talking about one of the most amazing organs in our body, and they actually deliver things to help feed our cells. Now, if you're feeding healthy cells and organs, those become the vessels of life. And what we eat, by the way, goes into our stomach and is absorbed into our bloodstream. So, they actually convey nutrients to our organs and help keep them alive, as well as oxygen, obviously. Now, what happens if you have disease? There are diseases like cancer that can actually hijack blood vessels and grow them selfishly to themselves. So cancers, by the way, most people don't know that we're all forming cancers in our bodies all the time, like a pimple on the skin.
That's the first line of your book. We have the first line of the angiogenesis chapter. We all have cancer growing in our body, every single one of us. That's so scary, by the way.
I want people to understand that our health defenses make cancer not an issue, because even those small cells can actually pop up and they're abnormal and cancerous. They can't grow bigger than the head of a ballpoint pen because they don't have a blood supply normally, and your immune system cruises around like a cop on a beat and finds these weird looking cells and just cleans them right up. Okay. And that's why we don't get cancer when we're younger. That's why most people don't get cancer. That's why we only get cancer when we're older, when our immune system goes down. And when cancers do develop, what they do is they actually release these proteins and they hijack blood vessels, so extra blood vessels grow up and feed the cancer. Think about a garden, and if a cancer is sort of like a weed, it's sort of stealing the water and the fertilizer that you're using to try to make your flowers grow really well. And so then the weeds can overgrow. So when cancers are able to steal blood vessels and feed themselves, all of a sudden they can explode. Here's an amazing fact. A cancer that is without a blood supply can only be the size of the tip of a ballpoint pen. But the moment they hijack blood vessels, they can grow 16,000 times in just 2 weeks. That's in size. And those same, so it explodes. And the same blood vessels that feed the cancer also allow cancer cells to escape into the circulation. So foods that can actually right size our blood vessels and prevent those extra blood vessels, anti-angiogenic foods, help our body mow the lawn to keep the perfect level of blood vessels at all times, all throughout our body. Not too few, not too many, just enough, kind of like Goldilocks. And so cancers can't be fed. That's what eating these anti-angiogenic foods can actually do.
So can you give some examples of foods and why that actually have that angiogenetic effect? It's a good word. Say it 10 times fast. And also, how are they helpful in protecting the body?
Yeah. Okay. So Mother Nature's very, very clever. She usually gives foods lots of different job descriptions. They wear lots of hats and they can do a lot of different things. And so, not surprisingly, some of the foods that we already know that are good for us, like green tea, for example, it's not only anti-inflammatory, not only lowers stress, not only helps your blood sugars and helps your blood lipids, get a little bit better, but the natural bioactive, the natural chemical found in tea leaves, it's called EGCG. It's a catechin that you can get in a cup of tea. Actually prevents extra blood vessels from growing. And it keeps normal blood vessels healthy, but it prevents extra ones from growing. And so the more tea you drink, the lower the risk of cancer. And that's what these epidemiological studies have actually found. Typically, how many cups of tea would you want to drink? Well, it depends. There are certain parts of the world, like in Asia, where people are just sipping tea all day long. I will tell you, my great uncle grew up in the southern area of China. He lived at the base of a tea mountain. That's all he did, to grow tea in the mountain. He'd get up at 4 o'clock every morning, walk up, exercise. So he's getting exercise, walk up to a little plateau and sit under and drink tea like for a few hours. He lived to 104 years old, completely intact, never had cancer. And it just kind of just goes to show you how a single food can actually be protective and defensive in so many ways. So green tea is a great example of that. We've done research, by the way, on this. And it's not just green tea. We've also studied green tea from different places. They have different potencies. So we studied Chinese jasmine tea, Japanese matcha. We studied Earl Grey. By the way, Earl Grey is a black tea.
I drink that so much.
I love Earl Grey, and I'll tell you why I love it, because when we did research, we actually found Earl Grey, which is a dark black tea with bergamot, which has got this sort of orange citrusy flavor, actually is more powerful than green tea to stop tumor blood vessels, for bad blood vessels growing to feed cancers. Wow, that's amazing. That's what science tells you. Like, just when you thought green tea was the best thing since sliced bread, wow, Earl Grey is even better. But I'll tell you what we did. We combined a jasmine tea, Chinese tea, and a Japanese sencha tea, and we just blended them together. Now, these wouldn't be teas that would be blended by the cultures, right? Like, I mean, you would never blend Chinese and Japanese tea together. That's sort of anathema culturally. But if you did that, what we found when we tested is that that blend was more powerful than Earl Grey. And so food synergies are amazing. These combinations that can do more. 1 + 1 = 3. That's great.
That is amazing. How do you score foods according to their anti-angiogenetic properties?
Yeah, well, so this is an important question. Before I really began studying foods the way I do now, I was involved through my nonprofit organization, the Angiogenesis Foundation, in trying to help develop breakthrough treatments, biotech treatments to treat diseases like cancer and diabetes and vision loss. Okay. And all of these are characterized by either too many or not enough blood vessels, particularly cancers and vision loss, diabetic retinopathy, and macular degeneration. There's too many blood vessels growing. So because I was involved with the biotech side, my group, and I led this, helped to develop the testing systems that drug companies use to develop drugs. So as you can imagine, these are like super sophisticated, super rigorous, super scientific testing systems. You can't get away with anything sloppy in these systems, right? Like you would just flunk out. So one of the things that I did is I started to, as I was testing drug candidates, I started throwing in a little food just to see what would happen. And the reason I did this is because, I realized, I did my research training up at Harvard in Boston. You could go to these amazing cancer researchers and they can mail order overnight incredible cancer drugs, and they can test them in the lab immediately after taking them out of the FedEx pack. But you can call in a food delivery and ask the researchers if they could test the food, and they wouldn't know how to do it. So I actually hacked into that to figure out how do we actually break down food to test it in the same systems as drugs. Now we have a head-to-head quantitative measure. You can count the potency of food. And that's one of the things that we really need in this new movement of food as medicine. We're not talking about making foods drugs. We're talking about using foods with the intent that we use medicine, which is to heal.
So in your TED Talk, you discussed food synergies. What does that mean?
All right.
You mentioned it
So,
with cheese, but I'm going to have
I'll tell you about other food synergies. What the idea of food synergies means that, like oftentimes when you go to people who are experts in wellness, they'll tell you about the pomegranate or the tomato, or they'll tell you about the avocado, and the bottom line is that we don't really eat foods in isolation, right? We eat foods together. That's, I'm a big believer that food is not only important for nutrition and our health, but it's also important to us as who we are. Food is part of the soul of humanity. It tells us about our past, our family, our culture, our community, and it talks to us about our roots, which is why everybody comes with different legacies of what kinds of foods they naturally prefer, right? And I think that's absolutely fine, and I like to dive into that. So that's where food synergies come from. So if I told you that in tomatoes there is a natural chemical called lycopene that actually can reduce the risk of prostate cancer in studies by about 30%. And how much do you have to eat? You have to eat about 2 to 3 cups of cooked tomato sauce per week. And this is what the Harvard Health Professionals follow-up study showed. This is 70,000 people that they enrolled in this gigantic study. And they found that men who had 2 to 3 cups of cooked tomato sauce had up to a 30% decreased risk of prostate cancer. So now if I told you that, so that's tomatoes, that's lycopene. But what if I told you that if you picked a tomato off a vine, that the lycopene that comes from the garden is not that readily absorbed by the body? In fact, most of it kind of goes right through. So how do you actually get that lycopene? Well, if you saute the tomato in low heat, the heat gently changes the chemistry of lycopene into a form your body really loves to absorb. It gets into your bloodstream. And because lycopene is what we call fat soluble, so it likes to dissolve in oil. So it doesn't like to dissolve in water, it likes to dissolve in oil. What's the best way to saute the tomato? With a little olive oil. And now it'll increase the saute. So think about that. That's a food synergy. That's a tomato with olive oil. And that is a traditional dish. And then you go even deeper into this to say, what kind of tomatoes and what kind of olive oils are best? We can go for potency, and we can say, well, if you actually go head to head and look for the amount of lycopene, the San Marzano tomato from Italy is the most potent.
Oh,
right?
Wow. Yeah.
Most potent, right? By the way, another less distant tomato, by the way, it's also present in canned tomatoes. And if you get tomato paste, San Marzano is also still there. But if you want to sort of like, a farmer's market or grocery store tomatoes, it turns out the cherry tomatoes are packed with punch too. So cherry tomatoes are also great. So, like if you've
Can you
never—
eat them raw though? Will they have the same effect raw?
Raw, you'll get different effects. You get the good vitamin C, you get a lot of the
But not the lycopene.
minerals from it,
Not
but
as
the
effective.
lycopene, you want to actually heat
Gotcha.
up. Now, if you want to get a tomato to eat that you don't want to have to cook, there's something called the tangerine tomato. And if you go out to the market in the summertime, this is what led me to this. When I go to the market in the summertime, I see so many tomatoes out there. It's confusing to me. Which one should I choose? So now we suddenly have science on our side to say, if I want something that's super healthy, I'm going to do this. San Marzano. It's got a thicker skin. It's great for sauces. But if you want something that you don't want to have to cook and you want to get that lycopene, the tangerine tomato, which is a yellow orange tomato, it's kind of like a tangerine, that naturally has lycopene that's already in the form that doesn't need to be heated up, that actually your body can absorb. This is what's the power of what science delivers to us. Like, we know this now. And if I know it, and I tell you, and you tell your friends, then everybody will start to know it, and it becomes second nature. And that's really where I think food as medicine is going. It's not about textbooks, Like, I wrote a book. It's great. I'm glad people really are digging it and they're reading it and they're learning something from it. But really, in my mind, it's about us embracing this knowledge so it becomes community knowledge.
Yeah, you are what you eat, and you should know what it is that you're eating so that you can optimize your health.
Yeah.
So once disease has arrived at an advanced stage in the system, what are those specific foods one can eat to stave back angiogenesis?
Right. Well, the foods that have actually been shown to actually reduce angiogenesis, even if you have disease, um, uh, are interesting, because here's what I do. I just follow the evidence. I follow the science. And when I follow the science, something amazingly surprising to me is that soy, which many women are told they might want to avoid if they're at risk for breast cancer. It turns out soy protects you against breast cancer. Even if you have it, it actually cuts off the blood supply. So this is a great story of how, in fact, it was an inspiration for me when I first read it. This is in the 90s. There was a research study where they collected the urine of farmers that lived in a village near Kyoto, Japan. This is a village of farmers that mostly eat vegetables and soybeans and soy foods, because in Asia there's a lot of different soy foods. Collected the urine, and so whatever was in the urine is what they ate. It got filtered out and and they had all these samples frozen in a lab someplace. And a researcher named Ted Fosis came into the lab and said, "Hey, you know what? I want to find out what's in this urine that the farmers might have been eating." And when he looked at it under using a special machine, he saw the normal stuff you'd find in urine, and then they saw these big spikes of unusual stuff. Like, what is that? That turned out to be a natural phytoestrogen from called genistein, found in soybeans. And so when he tested this on blood vessels, the same kind of blood vessels that would feed a cancer, completely shut them down. And by the way, we verified this at the National Cancer Institute using those tests results I told you that were used to study breast cancer drugs. And it was like, oh my God, like, that is an amazing power of soy. Now, so soy is anti-angiogenic, genistein's anti-angiogenic, but does it work in women, right? Is it like it's nice to tell you in the lab. So there was something called the Shanghai Women's Health Study that enrolled 5,000 women who already had breast cancer. These are the women who would be at the greatest risk because they already have breast cancer. And they found that those women who ate more soy, because in Asia, if you got breast cancer, they don't tell you to cut out all soy. Okay. So they just looked at what people are eating as part of their staple. Women who ate more soy had lower incidence, had lower death. And if they had their breast cancer treated, they had lower recurrence of their breast cancer. Okay. And how much soy did you need to eat? I'm all about the dose, how much. You only needed 10 grams of soy protein. That's about the amount you get in a single cup of soy milk. So not difficult to attain. This isn't about more isn't always more. If we can actually get it into like reasonable levels that we can incorporate in our lives. And so, one of the things that, I try to do is to use what science is teaching us to try to clear up myths.
Is there a lower rate of breast cancer in Japan as a result?
They're in Asia traditionally, yeah. Until now, the Western diet is starting to creep over there, and so now you start seeing the rates kind of go up all across the board. But other foods that are really anti-angiogenic as well. Here's a great one: tree nuts, almonds, macadamias, pistachios, pecans, walnuts, pine nuts even. they've studied this. Now, what's inside a nut? Well, it's not only a huge amount of fiber. Fiber is what we feed our gut bacteria, our microbiome. Whatever we're not absorbing, we're feeding to our gut bacteria, but gut bacteria eating them. Well, it turns out that the gut bacteria will create anti-angiogenic metabolites. They'll metabolize the fiber, they'll eat the fiber, and then as a side effect, they produce all these anti-angiogenic, anti-inflammatory substances. They're called short chain fatty acids. They get into our bloodstream. More nuts you eat, the more anti-inflammation and the more anti-angiogenesis, cancer-starving effects you have. And on top of that, there's healthy omega-3 fatty acids in nuts.
Nut milk.
What's that?
Nut
Nut milk, yeah, you'll get some in there in the nut milk as well. And so there was a study done that was led by a group of oncology centers, including Harvard and Yale and and Duke and a group of other people. And they found that in patients with stage 3 colon cancer, if they already have the disease, that those people who ate 2 handfuls of nuts a week had a 50% lower risk of death from their colon cancer. This is stage 3, really advanced disease. And the only thing they did was eat 2 fistfuls of nuts. And so they were getting treatment. So this is not food versus medicine. I'm not saying you shouldn't take your treatment. I'm saying that if you take your treatment and you had a couple of handfuls of nuts, you're adding to what doctors are trying to do for you. So I'm all about, using the right tool at the right place for the right person at the right time. There is a place for medicine, but food is all the time.
What about miso? Any benefit studies?
Miso is a great source of soy protein. There have been some studies looking at miso. I think mostly looking at the anti-inflammatory benefits of miso. Miso is fermented soy. Fermentation is really great. Does all kinds of things for you.
So I think the burning question on everyone's minds today is COVID. How does angiogenesis, does it have a role in staving off COVID or healing from it? COVID being an oxygen depriving virus, or is regeneration more of a focus for this disease? And what is your assessment of COVID?
Yeah, so look, I studied all these health defense systems, and I'm a specialist in angiogenesis blood vessels. So when I jumped into the deep end of the pool at the beginning of this pandemic and started to do research, I felt like I had to contribute something to help, help humanity get out of this crisis that we're in. And I didn't know what I would find, but what I found was startling, that this respiratory virus, the SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus, not only got into our lungs, but once in our body, made a beeline to infect our blood vessels, the cells of our blood vessels. Now you got a blood vessel infection or a vascular disease, which is it put this pandemic right into my wheelhouse. Now, because I know something about blood vessels, actually a lot about blood vessels, one of the things that I found is the following thing. We talked about blood vessels in cancer, but what we didn't talk about yet is blood vessels in healing. When we are injured, whether it's a cut or an accident, everybody's scraped their knee, falling off rollerblades or bicycle, or cut themselves, paper cut or knife cut. If you have a scab, if that scab falls off prematurely, you see this like bright red stuff underneath. Those are your body's mounting an intense angiogenic blood vessel growing response to bring new vessels that will deliver nutrients and oxygen to heal that wound. So when our body naturally heals, when there's injury, an insult, it'll actually bring blood vessels there. So here's what we found with COVID. It's amazing that basically the coronavirus infects the lungs and then it affects the blood vessels in the body. And we think it spreads throughout the body in these blood vessels. But one of the things, when the blood vessels are infected, they get injured. So now what does the body do? It says, well, let's mount an angiogenic response. So it's trying to grow new blood vessels to get around the damaged ones, and also to repair, using regeneration, to repair that damage as well. This is why we have the damage is why we have blood clotting, which is why it affects the brain, the lung, the heart, the kidneys, and the toes. All these crazy things that we're seeing are damage. I think that it's a matter of inflammation, blood vessel damage, and nerve damage, all converging at the same time. The so-called long hauler syndrome, long COVID, post-COVID syndrome. So one of the things that we're now beginning to expand our ideas on, how can we prevent the virus from entering our body. So, masking, social distancing, hand washing, all very important. Are there ways that we can up the ante for our immune system so it stays in our nose or just in our mucus and gets destroyed in our nose or our saliva? Yeah, there's some foods you can eat that actually can try to amp your immunity so it doesn't get down into your blood vessels, or even into your smell gland, the olfactory organ that's behind your nose. We want to protect that too, because a lot of people lose a sense of smell. And if you've had COVID, what should you do to prevent damage? Now, if you look at what doctors are doing, they're giving anticoagulants, blood thinners, but that's serious business
I
there.
was
We got
just
to
going
be
to
able
ask
to.
you about blood thinners and if they have an
Yeah.
angiogenesis effect.
Well, blood thinners actually can help protect the blood vessels. In the case of for COVID, angiogenesis naturally occurs in the lung and elsewhere to try to repair the areas that are damaged, but it can't quite repair it because the blood vessels are damaged. So you can't repair. It's kind of like a carpenter trying to fix a broken wall by bringing his toolbox, but the hammer is actually broken itself. You can't fix something with something that's broken. Because not only you can't fix what's broke, you can't fix it with a tool that's broke too. So that's one of the problems. And we think that in post-COVID, long hauler syndrome, these blood vessels, even after the virus is gone, these blood vessels are still damaged and their body's trying to repair itself. Big question. Can we use diet to actually repair our blood vessels? Can we use foods that stimulate regeneration? What are some of those regenerative foods? Can we use dark chocolate, cacao flavanols to do it? Like who wouldn't like to use dark chocolate to actually heal themselves, right? So there are clinical studies that show if people have damaged blood vessels, you can actually have dark chocolate. What about tea? Black tea, green tea can also repair blood vessels. It turns out that there are other, even fruit peel. It's interesting. If you actually it's apple season, you peel off the layers of the fruit. Now, if you get organic, then you don't have to worry about pesticides. But what can you do with fruit peel? There's interesting things you can start thinking about. Can you bake them? Can you do other interesting things to cook with them? Can you blend them? Fruit peel has a natural chemical called ursolic acid that stimulates angiogenesis. And so there's all these ways of naturally coaxing stem cells out of our body that is wonderful to think about how to build into our diet. So I'm working on that. Nitric oxide, which are, believe it or not, there's a microbiome, natural healthy bacteria in our tongue that when we eat spinach, for example, it's got a lot of the soil that it grows in, hopefully healthy soil, has nitrates. Like that's basically what you need to fertilize good nitrogen in the soil. When you eat spinach, if you chew it long enough, the bacteria in your tongue convert the nitrogen from the spinach into a form of nitric oxide that when you swallow gets absorbed into your bloodstream. Nitric oxide lowers blood pressure, helps make your blood vessels healthier, and stimulates regeneration. And so this is a way of eating, leafy greens and beets. Beets is another great source of nitrogen. By the way, here's another myth for you. Nitrates, we think about nitrates in processed meats and hot dogs, and people go, man, we don't want any nitrates in our food. Here's what I would tell you. Here's the clarification. You don't want nitrates in processed foods, like ultra processed foods or processed meats. But nitrates, natural nitrates, are present in the soil, and those are good for you. In fact, there's like 12 times more nitrate in a serving of spinach than in a hot dog, believe it or not. So it's, so don't, we want to make sure that we're really assigning the proper qualities. So spinach would be another thing that can help heal blood vessels. So yeah, so I think we're really talking for COVID about foods that can actually protect our blood vessels and help us heal.
I think that's the part 2 of this book.
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, here's how I look at it. We still don't have a cure for COVID. Vaccines are on their way. We'll see how they work. We've got some treatments that are okay. They're really not that great. They're okay. They're all we got. And so while doctors and hospitals don't offer us a real solution, what can we do ourselves is treat ourselves.
Speaking of treating oneself, I've always been an advocate that being your own best doctor is the way to go, and knowledge is power. And you provide so much wonderful information about foods in this book. Simple information, digestible information. And the Assess Your Risk chapter is a great way to keep score of your genetic and medical history and understand your risks better. Why do you think everyone needs to understand their own bodies fully now more than ever to direct their genetic fate?
Yeah, I'm sorry for the noise in the background, but we are all different. Every one of us is individual. And when we talk about personalized nutrition, precision nutrition, we're really talking about what works for us. What works for you, Christina, might not work for me, and vice versa, and that's okay. So in my book, I talk about really taking stock, auditing what we know about ourselves, everything from our history, our parents, our lifestyle, our jobs, our kids, our homes, where we live, where we've lived, past tense, to our genetics, to everything that we know about ourselves, the medicines we take. That's what makes us all individuals. And that informs how we should approach nutrition.
So besides the fact that I want to say to all the viewers, don't walk, run to the bookstore and get this incredible, incredible book. It's a tome for sure, but read it right away. Eat to Beat Disease. Dr. Lee, what is one thing you'd like our viewers to do first for the sake of their health?
Well, I want people to love their food in order to love their health. And by that, what I mean is that take stock of what you already love. Take stock of the foods that relate to you so well that you actually would love to eat them. And look on those lists of healthy foods that I have in my book and circle them and take a picture of them with your cell phone. And then when you go to the store or when you're meal planning, flip open that picture on which you circled. And if you start eating what you already love that is healthy, then you're already way ahead of the game. And I think that, looking for those foods that you love that are healthy, and then going online and searching for recipes that might excite you. Or, when we're out at restaurants again, sometime in the future, I'll tell you how I look at how I use the menu when I open up a menu at a restaurant. Because I recognize the healthy ingredients, I just cruise down the whole menu and I'm just looking for things that I recognize are going to light up my health. And those things automatically make my mouth water. Like, I want to order those things. And that is just a great way to go. You should love your food in order to love your health.
I wish your book would become required reading for high schoolers, especially as they embark off on their collegiate and rest of life experiences. I mean, no one teaches you about food as medicine on that path to life. So it's important that parents really learn this so they can share it with their offspring. I heard a little, did I hear a child in the background too?
I have an odd phone ring. So.
Okay, it's very cute. So last question, what's the best advice anyone's ever given you?
I would say be open to the unexpected. When I was learning about medicine and research, most of us are taught to be very disciplined and very rigid and very structured. And one of the best mentors I've ever had, his name was Dr. Judah Folkman, taught me to open my mind to any possibility. And that way you're not presupposing anything. You're just welcoming what Mother Nature, when it comes to science and medicine and health, what Mother Nature delivers to you. And I think that's something for me has really allowed me to explore things that I might not have otherwise explored, to get into areas that I haven't gotten into, and also to discover new joys that I actually didn't realize existed. And so if life is a journey and your journey allows you to explore new things that bring you joy, then you can make the whole trip that way.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I do have one more question. So you spent decades studying food like medicine because food is medicine. As a pioneer of angiogenesis-based therapy, did you find it difficult to acquire funding for your foundation and support for the clinical trials for food?
It's an interesting question. We started 25 years ago. We're a 501c3 organization based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Anybody who wants to check out our URL is www.angio.org. When I started this organization, there were no angiogenesis treatments. So even back then, people were like, "What are we funding here?" This concept doesn't. There's no real concept, and it's not about a disease. And what I was convincing people is that it's not about the disease. It's about the process that underlies health. And I was trying for 25 years to convince people to support. Finally, when the treatment started to come by, because we were involved with 34 FDA approved treatments, people started to pay more attention. And we got a lot of, corporate support and other things. What's interesting, when we started to look at food, it became a lot more difficult to get funding. Absolutely. And you know why? Because food isn't about companies. Food is by the people, for the people. And to me, that's sort of the constitution of our health is our food. And so I, am really always delighted when I find somebody who believes that Mother Nature has delivered solutions that drug companies haven't yet been able to figure out, may not ever figure out, and want to take the chance, want to invest, do that social investment in people that are not afraid to go back into nature to figure out what Mother Nature's already known, to bring it to the people. And for me, that's my mission in life now, is to really try to bring my organization back into harmony and back into nature, and to see if we can get food to do it. So, I always welcome people to learn more about what I do. I love to get support from different individuals. It's just one of the best pleasures that I actually have I love my food, I love my health, and I love my job. I mean, it's great to be able to work on healthy food that tastes great.
Well, you're saving lives, and we certainly appreciate that. And this book really is a must read. And I appreciate your time today, Dr. Lee. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you, Christine. It's a real pleasure.
Take care.
Thank you to our sponsors. Brain Juice. Boxed water is better. OHO Full Spectrum CBD. Rejuvenation Health.